Hello and welcome to another intriguing episode of Furries in the Media. I'm your host Abergwine, and today I wanted to review Channel 2 from LA News on their coverage of the furry fandom in their segment titled Fur Fetish.
Whether it's self-expression or a fetish,
not even 5 seconds in, and furries are already labeled as fetishists.
Furries are people who like to dress up like animals.
Mention of it being a fetish aside, they seem to define furries as people who like to dress up as animals, which is a passable definition, but it falls to the wayside by the report's focus on sex.
And they're coming out of their fur-lined closets. Tonight we take you inside their secret world.
There's nothing to come out of the closet for by being a furry, because being a furry is not a sexual preference.
They're animal lovers, and they get a warm, fuzzy feeling from fur.
The typography for this new segment features a kiss imprint, totally not suggesting anything.
You might be surprised, but there are plenty of people who are into a dress-up game for grown-ups.
And here the phrase, a dress-up game for grown-ups, is just subtle enough to push the viewers into a mindset that furries shouldn't be taken seriously.
If I'm going to put this costume, I know the day is going to be fun or the night's going to be fun.
These are non-furries dressed in fur-lined clothing, not even furry costumes. I mean, seriously, this is just a guy in a fur coat. That's not a costume.
It feels so soft, and it makes people want to hug you, and how great is that?
And the people they're interviewing don't act like furries. There has not been a single mention of community or celebration of the arts, but they instead just say things like, I just like the feel of fur, it's so soft. These are either paid actors or Joe Blow is getting duped.
Sex therapist and talk show host Dr. Susan Block understands why some furries rub people the wrong way.
You know, that's the weirdest therapist office I've ever seen. I'm starting to think that she's not a professional.
It makes them feel like children again, and it's almost downright offensive to them to hear people talking about sex and furries in the same breath.
This is a weirdly ironic message coming from a supposed sex therapist. You would expect her to better understand the mindset of the people she's being interviewed about, and you would expect her to already know that most furries don't want to be associated with sex. The way she worded her statement and the overall tone of the news report makes it seem as though furries are not justified in being offended by the association of their hobby with sexual activity.
When we see a furry, we're getting images from our childhood.
The news station pulls clips from the CSI episode as filler while their therapist narrates. Keep it classy, y'all.
I'm having a little bit of a bunny fetish lately.
I have nothing to say here.
This is weirding me out.
Shows like CSI have featured this fetish aspect.
The news channel seems to put CSI in a factual light. Oh dear God, did they get this wrong? But that's coming up in its own episode.
I think that a lot of furries aren't actually having sex. There's some that just like the softness of fur. They just like how it feels.
Whoa, Nelly!
However, my feeling is, as a sex therapist, that they are actually expressing the sexual side of themselves through being furries.
Their therapist makes the claim that even if a furry is not having sex or just enjoys the feel of fur, she feels that they are expressing their sexual side of themselves by being furries. This is the setup they've been pushing for all along. Sure, it is just an opinion, but it's a professional opinion, and that's what this news channel is banking on.
For Makiko, aka Fudgy Bear, and her furry friends, dressing up in costumes isn't freaky, it's simply fun.
As a matter of fact, all the kids really like us, too.
Makiko designs furry costumes for members of a performance artist group called the Dream Circus.
Dream Circus? That's a strange name for a group of furries. And also, notice how it's the news report making all the claims that she's the one designing furry costumes?
To these furries, the sexual connection is a misconception.
No one will believe these performers who dress up in furry outfits because they're not authority figures.
We've had people ask us, are you those other furries that are sexual? And I didn't know anything about it. And we're not harming anybody. We're just having our own fun.
And the performers even admit that they don't associate with furries, and they probably wouldn't consider themselves furries. If they aren't furries, then what are they doing in this news segment?
There are some furries who find that they can express their sexuality best through wearing an animal costume. They really are rather repressed about sex, or they're very insecure about their appearance.
Their therapist makes the claim that furries can express their sexuality best through wearing a costume, and that they're either very repressed about sex or very insecure about their appearance. Stellar words there.
Have you ever tried to have sex with clothes on? It's not very easy, is it? Can you imagine doing it in a bunny suit? doesn't really work.
The news station has edited this in such a way that with the appropriate context, this guy looks like he's in denial about having sex in an animal costume. How about those review stats? Information accuracy is 0%, and the spirit of the clip is 0%, averaging out to a whopping 0%. Awesome job, y'all. And now time for my thoughts. This is news reporting at its most manipulative. Their sex therapist? Quick Wikipedia search on her tells me that she's not a licensed therapist, she's only a self-proclaimed therapist. Oh, and that group Dream Circus? Not once did the performers call themselves furries, and any assertions of such were made by the news reporters. A quick Google search actually tells me that this is a troupe of non-furry performers in the underground music scene. My only conclusion is that they were being purposely misled and misrepresented by the station. Every last aspect of this news report is perfectly crafted so they can push their message onto the masses that furries are fetishists or sex addicts, no matter how hard they try to argue to the contrary. I don't think I've come across a clip that's gotten me so enraged at the outright lies they have presented, but this takes the cake. There's no accuracy, and there is no positive light to be shown on the furry community. Well, that's it for today's episode. Have fun, stay awesome. Bye-bye.